This is Kat Sturtz from rockingyourpath.com with a new episode of Fast Action Fridays. My special guest today is a repeat guest, Margaret Eves from videogenealogy.com. I actually said it right.
That's right.
Oh my God. You have got so much background and are so inspiring when it comes to capturing moments of our lives and the past histories of those we love and those we know and just history in general. And I just love your approach to all of this. So if you're watching this live or you're watching a replay, make sure and pay attention to some of the special opportunities you'll get from Margaret to get your hands on some of her goodies. Today, we've got Mother's Day coming up, and you and I thought it would be really cool to kind of focus on something that kind of honored our mothers and our mother figures. So take us into that. First, give us a little bit more about your background and lead us right into what our discussion is for today.
Sure. Well, my background includes a background in video production, which I loved, mostly as an editor. So that's all about stories, is putting together things to create a story. And then I also have a background in libraries and a background as a genealogist, just researching family history and teaching others how to research their family history. And what I always tried to include in that when I was teaching a class or teaching students is that if they can put together a story, do their research, but then put together a story, and it doesn't have to be long, it can be short, that includes photographs, includes visuals, and just is something that can grab the attention of the rest of their family. And the whole point of that is that when you engage a family member who might not necessarily be the researcher, may not be the genealogist, but if you engage them and capture their imagination in a sense and help them see that the people, the ancestors before them were live people who did things, then you help to make them aware of their own family history and so that doesn't get lost.
Right.
Because that's what happens so much is people just don't even know about the stories. And if you make it engaging and memorable, people remember it. Yeah. And that's the whole point of the video.
Right. There are a couple of things that you mentioned that I love. One, you have been able to merge together three different paths into one of some of your passions. Library, video editing, the whole video process, and then history and genealogy. And I keep telling a lot of my clients want to know how they can take their different interests, and is there a way to mold them into a single business entity. Now, you still do library work, but I love that you've have this sort of trifecta of skills that you've brought together for that. The other thing we talked about.
Yeah, we take what you have and use it. Yeah.
And some of us don't give ourselves credit for the skills we do know. You know? The other thing you and I talked about is how many more questions I have now that I'm older that I would love to have answered by my mother who's passed, to my grandmother, both of them who have passed, to my great-grandmothers who have passed. Now I know the questions to ask, and I really wish I had paid more attention to that when they were alive so I could hear those wonderful stories. So, are there some quick tips for us to follow that we can start this process for ourselves or revive that interest?
Right. Well, I think in a way, I mean, sometimes you can't ask a question if you don't know what you don't know. And I think if you're sitting down with anyone and you're trying to help them tell their story. Photographs are a wonderful way of doing that. Just sitting down with some loose photographs, old photos, maybe an old yearbook, a scrapbook, anything, and just get them talking about it. And then just start asking those open-ended questions, who's in the photograph? Where were you? What were you doing? What do you remember about that place? Do you remember what that day was like? How did you feel? And sometimes they don't always have an answer, but it can lead to things. And it's happened more often than not when I was able to sit down with my mom and we would start looking at photos, and then, it just would lead to some story that I had never even expected. And that's what's the beauty of a photo, can really help trigger some memories. And then asking about feelings. I think that's an important thing. How did what was going on at the time? What was the weather like? Was it hot or cold? Or, what were your favorite foods? All those things that bring up sensory memories are so powerful. So that's one tip, is using the photos to kind of trigger all that.
That's a great tip.
Another way, I mean, and it's easy too. Another tip is, while you're asking about those photos and things, is use your tools that you have. Oh. This is an easy one, is your smartphone. Just lit up. But the smartphone has, at least on an iPhone and probably on an Android, you can get an app that's can record sound. An example on the iPhone is that it has something called voice memos that comes with it. You don't even have to download it or buy it. It's very simple to use. You open it up, you hit the red button, it records. So you can have that sitting with you at the table, and while you're talking, record the conversation, and then you have that conversation to listen back to, or if you want to get it transcribed, there's some very easy tools you can use online. There's a lot out there now. Otter AI is one that just comes to mind.
Rev.com and Temi. Yep.
Yeah. And Trent, and, just, there's a bunch of them if you just look up, voice transcription. Mm-hmm. And then, use that tool, because it's right there. And then you can always take that audio and include it in a video. If you were talking about photographs, you bring in the photos, you bring in that audio, and you can edit it down into a nice little piece. If you've never used any kind of video editing software, there are some simple tools that you could just start with. And the idea there is just keep it simple. If a story was told, let the story be told, use some photographs, and keep it short. That's what I always tell people. We're not trying to we're not trying to make a Ken Burns documentary. We're trying to tell a 2 or 3 minute story.
And that would be true
whether
whether
people
we're
want to watch anyway.
Somebody or just recording the audio. And that's
right.
So much more, so much easier to do than try to capture notes and then transcribe our own notes. And because you're missing the flavor of the story from the person who's telling it often.
Right. You just want to be able to listen and capture it.
So listen more than we ask questions.
My Yes. Oh, yes. And one thing I learned working in radio, and you've learned working in radio and video, is that when you're interviewing someone, nodding is great. You try not to interrupt or keep saying, but just that silent nod is the key. It keeps people going, keeps people talking, lets them know you're listening. So that's a good tip too.
And I know you have another tip for us.
My other tip is, think of it in terms of their connection to the past. Whoever you're talking to, whether it's a mom or a grandmother or maybe an older aunt, is they knew someone before them who was a mother figure or a grandmother figure. Ask them, who's the oldest person they know, say the oldest grandmother you knew, or maybe the oldest aunt that you knew. Who do you remember? Think back from when you were really young, and what do you remember about them? And then that way you're kind of able to try to go back even further and make those connections. And they all probably come up with some stories about people you might have never even heard of. And so that's another good thing of it. Think in terms of, you know, how far back does that person's memory go? And can you tap into that? And that's a fun thing to do.
Okay. And anything else before
Any other tips? Let's see. I like, this is kind of a real genealogist tip, but but it's fairly basic when you're doing genealogy, and that's to use census records. And those are the records where they went out and counted everybody, and you can go and you can see the most recent one we can look at is from the 1940s. So if you know anyone who was alive in the US during the 1940s, and they did censuses in other countries as well, you can go back, and if you knew where they lived or maybe the town, you can probably find that family. So if you know that person's grandparents, you can find them in the 1940 census, the street they lived on. It lists everybody on that street. And I've sat down with my mom and shown her that, and she was able to start talking about her neighbors because they were listed there. And she'd tell about, this neighbor, he'd come over to the back fence while I was practicing piano, and he'd chat with me through the window while I'm trying to practice piano, and they had chickens in their backyard. And then later on, that same guy grew up to be the postman, and he would always come and he'd deliver the mail, but then he'd stop and chat and have a Coca-Cola. So it took him forever to deliver the mail. Just this, from looking at a census record, it came up because these were her neighbors. And that's what you see, that these aren't just people listed on a sheet of paper. They were live people. So that's a genealogist tool for research, but it's also a great tool for bringing alive memories and starting those conversations.
Do you have suggestions for how to save the information we do collect so it's safe for future generations? I mean, I've lost photos in the past, due to, flooding or things just being lost, or the type of paper it was on, the acid-based papers we've had in the past. Are there better places to save our collected stories from our mothers and other family members?
Right. A good thing to keep in mind is think of the letters in the word lock or locks, and think of lots of copies keeps stuff safe. The idea being is you want to have more than one copy of something. If you can digitize the photographs, and then you can, with digital photographs, you can send multiple copies very easily to cousins, to brothers and sisters, to aunts and uncles. So everybody has, in a sense, a digital copy of the photo. The photo itself, the physical photo, you do want to keep that in a safe place that's dry, that's not really humid, not in the attic, not in the damp basement, but in a place that is going to be fairly, the climate's fairly controlled and stable. And, try to keep it away from outer walls and windows and kind of the obvious stuff. But again, that whole idea of lots of copies keep stuff safe is if you can digitize stuff as much as possible and then make people aware of it. That's the other thing, is having multiple people who are aware that this material exists, which is again where video and stories can play a part. You can tell somebody one time, I have this box of stuff, but if they've heard the stories about the people who have their pictures in this box of stuff, they're more than likely to go, let's, take care of these photographs and pass them on. So it's kind of almost like a marketing. It really is. You're marketing the family history, and that's keeping it fresh, keeping it in people's minds, and keeping it appealing and engaging.
I know one of my cherished possessions is the Goward family reunion folder that a cousin put together for us for a reunion we had. And she had copies of the census from various relatives that we had, pictures. And when we got together, it was interesting to see pictures from various family members of past family members that I'd never seen before. I had never seen a photograph of my great grandfather before then. And I
Wow.
grew up thinking that none existed, where it was just all of the pictures were with one particular family member. And when that member passed, they got passed down the line. And luckily, one of the people that came to our reunion brought that box with them. So I really
Wow.
appreciate that. And she's been kind enough to make copies of this binder and each of the pages in that binder for any of the family members who asked. So a lot of it is
Wow.
digital, but we
Yeah.
also have this physical one that's really fun to sit down
Right.
and go through.
Yeah, creating a book or a photo book, I think you can digitize things and then create books. I actually worked with a gentleman who had served during World War II, and he had done his family history, and he had a whole book of photographs. He was really into creating, all these photos and having it for his family, but he was just working with, photocopies, and he wasn't a computer guy, but I helped him get it digitized. And then that way and we created a book on a site called Lulu. And Lulu allows you to create a book that can be, it's print on demand. So anyone in his family could go to that site and they could get a copy of that book made for them. They could pay for it, and then he wanted to get multiple copies for his family, but this allowed a reasonable way to get copies of a book without having to print 500 or whatever.
Exactly.
So that's a really great way to get the books out, and so people can get access to it. Another really key thing is if you can do things like blog posts or Facebook groups, and you're getting those photos out. This is a story that kind of amazed me. On Ancestry, I had posted a few photographs with my family tree there on Ancestry, and somebody contacted me and said, I have that same photo. It was of my great-great-grandfather from the Civil War era. And he said, I have that same photograph in my collection. I'd never heard of this guy. And he also had another photograph of my great-grandfather that I had never seen before. And so it turns out we were figuring out, okay, we must be cousins or something. We figured out this family connection, but it was because of a photograph that he saw. And so that's the power of that too, is people see it.
Yeah. It's
a great way to connect with cousins.
I have a blog post about my grandma Aileen, who lived to be almost 102. And it talks about her humor and her kindness, and a little episode we had because she got her ears pierced late in life. And once she did hers, I finally did mine. And I think I was 26 or 28. So we're talking, and she's my grandmother. So you can imagine how much older she was when she first got her ears pierced. And we were driving one day, and I said, Grandpa always gives you the best jewelry for birthdays and holidays and things like that. And she said, oh, yes. And I said, well, could I inherit more of those someday? And she says, oh, Kathy Sue, I'd love to give you the ones I'm wearing today. And I looked over, and she had black thread in her holes. No earrings on that day at all. And the reason I brought that up right now is because of that blog post, someone from the church I had grown up in, an elderly woman, and this was after my grandmother had passed away, happened to come across that blog post and contacted. And it was wonderful to talk about, growing up in the church together. And, she was younger than my grandmother, but much more older than me. And she was just delighted to hear that story and see a familiar face on the computer. I have a couple more questions. So
she has stories she could tell you.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want to get back to our core premise, though, and that's about talking with mothers and our mother figures in our life. And I've got two questions, and I'm going to state them both and then let you answer them in whatever order you'd like. One, do you have tips for us when a family member, in this case, a mother or a mother figure, is reluctant to share? Do we bother nudging them? Do we respect their privacy or their feelings to not share maybe something in the family's past they don't want revealed? So that's question one. Question two is, I'm a mother. I think you are too, aren't you? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I love the idea of asking our relatives these questions. I have no older female relatives anymore and only a couple of male relatives. Are there tips for encouraging our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to interview us? So that's the two things from
Those are great
people.
questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for the first one, I'll take the first one first. And I think there's kind of two approaches. One is that sometimes by asking some more indirect questions, kind of like I mentioned before, you might learn a little more. People might open up more if you're not being super direct or confrontational. And it allows them to talk about things more on their own terms. And then in terms of if people are, sometimes you just have to respect people's feelings. If they're very, very reluctant to talk about something, you've got to respect that. You know, there are things for some people, it's either truly embarrassing or something that they felt shame about, or just in their day, you just didn't talk about that. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to respect that. You know, our things are a little different now than they might have been, 50 years ago. So you sometimes have to respect that. But also, like I said, sometimes using an indirect question, you can learn a little bit more and let people say what they do want to say. As far as encouraging our children to interview people or talk to people, it's a matter, if we can find out things about someone that would help resonate with our kids, that is something that's relevant to them, they might be more likely to want to ask about it. If there's something that they have something that's in common with another relative that gives them that connection, they might be more likely to interview them. But I think, kids in general like making that connection with the older generation. They don't want to be forced in any way. That's the other thing, is trying to, do anything that can make it be something the kid, the younger person enjoys doing, and then they can, spend that time with, and because I think they like to make that connection with their grandparents or with an aunt or uncle. So it's just fun, trying to find that commonality, that thing that they're both enthusiastic about. Mm-hmm. And then the kids will have the tools. They've got the tools to record and just, they're used to that. So, that can be the thing, is like, can you help me? Mm-hmm. And I think in general, kids want to be helpful, and then let them kind of lead the way.
That's a great tip. Our tech savvy kids, let them handle the tech part of it. And by osmosis, we'll be exposed to some of these stories and maybe get an interest in asking
right.
their own questions about past and learning about our varied histories. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So,
and making it a conversation.
Yes. Making it a conversation. I love that. Absolutely. Well, I love the tips you bring us about saving our past history stories and our genealogy explorations, which I find incredibly fascinating for myself. And I'm always surprised when I do have a few relatives who couldn't care less. And then I will mm-hmm. share a story or two and they'll go, I didn't know that. And it's like, well, mm-hmm. you had no interest in knowing it. So to go back to our very first quick action step, you and I are really encouraging people to sit down with our mothers, our mother figures, our other relatives. Make it simple and easy to share the stories by asking questions or looking at photographs to kind of fuel the interest and just letting them talk and share with us. Did I get the gist of that?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I tell you what, it's fun. It really is fun.
It is fun. It is.
Yeah.
Even when the
Yeah.
tears come, sometimes it can be so heartwarming and occasionally heart-wrenching, but you
Hmm.
just connect at a deeper level, I think, when you do that with your
Yeah.
family and even
Yeah.
friends sometimes. I am so glad you joined us today again for Fast Action Fridays. Listeners and viewers will have to know that you offer an ancestor video starter kit, which I've got a copy of. You've got also an ebook, and we'll be putting links so people can find those. And please come back and be with us again in the future.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again.
Oh, I
It's
would
been
love
fun,
that.
and I just, yeah, I just love encouraging people to just get together and share the stories.
Definitely. And I want to hear some of the stories that those people listening to us go out and gather from their moms and mother figures and the rest of the families. I love to hear that. So feel free to share those with us. This is Kat Sturtz from rockingyourpath.com, closing another episode of Fast Action Fridays and reminding you to keep rocking your unique path to success. See you next time.